In the deepest reaches of the ocean, where sunlight has long surrendered and pressure crushes anything unprepared, something moves that feels less like an animal and more like a mistake. An evolutionary experiment that never quite corrected itself, a creature so strange that even seasoned scientists hesitate before describing it. The goblin shark doesn't just look unusual, it looks wrong, like it was assembled from mismatched parts of entirely different organisms and then abandoned in the dark to survive or disappear unnoticed, and yet somehow, against all odds, it has persisted for over 100 million years, outliving entire dynasties of species, quietly lurking in the cold silence of the deep sea as if time itself forgot to update it. Its story begins not with modern oceans, but in a prehistoric world where dinosaurs still ruled the land and ancient seas teemed with unfamiliar predators. And while most creatures from that era have long since vanished, the goblin shark remains, almost unchanged, almost frozen, earning it a title that sounds dramatic but is scientifically accurate. A living fossil, but that term doesn't capture just how unsettling its existence really is, because fossils are supposed to be echoes of the past, not active hunters still gliding through the abyss. The first time humans encountered one in the late 19th century near Japan, the reaction wasn't fascination, it was confusion, even discomfort, because nothing about its anatomy follows the rules we subconsciously expect from sharks, creatures we think we understand, with streamlined bodies, predictable features, evolutionary efficiency. But the goblin shark defies that image completely. Its body is flabby and almost translucent, tinted with a ghostly pink hue caused by blood vessels visible beneath its skin, as if it's perpetually exposed, unfinished. Its fins are small and awkwardly positioned, offering none of the graceful power seen in great white sharks. And then there is its most disturbing feature, the elongated, flattened snout, protruding like a blade or a broken spear, covered in electroreceptors so sensitive they could detect the faint electrical signals of prey hidden in darkness, a biological radar system that replaces vision in a world where eyes are nearly useless. But even this adaptation feels exaggerated, stretched beyond what seems necessary, as if evolution pushed too far and never pulled back. Yet the true horror of the goblin shark isn't immediately visible. It's hidden within its skull, waiting, because unlike other sharks that rely on speed and bite force, the goblin shark employs a mechanism so bizarre it feels mechanical rather than biological, a feeding strategy that turns its entire face into a weapon. But before we understand that, we have to understand the environment that shaped it, because nothing this strange evolves without reason. And the deep sea is not just another habitat, it is one of the most extreme ecosystems on Earth, a place defined by scarcity, where food is rare, encounters with prey are unpredictable, and every movement costs energy that may never be regained. In such an environment, traditional hunting strategies fail, speed becomes less useful than precision, brute force less valuable than efficiency, and over millions of years, the goblin shark adapted in ways that seem alien because the rules of its world are alien to us. Its skeleton is less calcified than other sharks, making it softer, more flexible. Conserving energy rather than maximizing strength, its muscles are weaker, its movement slower, but this isn't a flaw, it's a strategy, a calculated trade-off in a place where survival depends on patience rather than pursuit. And yet even among deep-sea creatures, the goblin shark stands out as something extreme, something that feels like it crossed a boundary others did not. And scientists still debate whether its design represents an optimized solution or a bizarre evolutionary detour that simply happened to work well enough to persist, because evolution doesn't aim for perfection, it only favors what survives, and sometimes what survives looks unsettling. When deep-sea submersibles capture footage of goblin sharks, the reactions are almost always the same, a mix of awe and discomfort, because watching it move feels like watching something that shouldn't exist in the modern world. Its slow drifting motion suddenly interrupted by bursts of action that seem almost violent compared to its otherwise lethargic demeanor, as if it's conserving energy for something very specific, something precise. And those moments hint at a deeper truth, that beneath its awkward exterior lies a mechanism so specialized, so unervingly effective, that it allows this ancient predator to thrive in an environment where failure means starvation. But what makes it truly abnormal isn't just how it looks or where it lives. It's how it hunts, how it feeds, how it interacts with its world in a way that challenges our understanding of what a shark is supposed to be. And as we begin to unravel those mechanisms, piece by piece, the goblin shark stops being just a strange curiosity and starts becoming something far more disturbing, because it reveals a side of evolution that is rarely discussed, a side where survival doesn't produce beauty or elegance, but instead creates forms that feel almost grotesque. Solutions that work so well they don't need to be refined, leaving behind creatures that seem out of place, like artifacts from a different version of Earth, still moving, still hunting, still alive, waiting in the darkness where almost nothing else can endure. What truly separates the goblin shark from nearly every other predator on Earth is not just its appearance, but a feeding mechanism so extreme that for years scientists struggled to even classify it within normal biological behavior. Because when the goblin shark decides to strike, it doesn't chase, it doesn't lunge in the traditional sense, and it certainly doesn't rely on the brute force we associate with sharks. Instead, it deploys its jaws, launching them forward at astonishing speed in a motion that feels less like a bite and more like a biological projectile, a sudden, violent extension where its entire jaw structure detaches and shoots outward from its face, propelled by elastic ligaments and specialized muscles that store energy like a compressed spring, and in a fraction of a second, those jaws can extend several centimeters beyond the snout, snapping shut around prey before retracting just as quickly. A mechanism so unusual that high-speed cameras were required to fully understand it, revealing that the goblin shark's feeding strike is one of the fastest movements recorded in any marine predator, despite the animal itself appearing slow and almost lethargic moments before, and this contradiction, between sluggish motion and explosive precision, is the key to understanding why this design exists at all, because in the deep sea, opportunities are rare, and missing a single meal can mean weeks without another chance, so instead of evolving to chase prey across distances, the goblin shark evolved to eliminate the possibility of failure within striking range, turning each encounter into a near-guaranteed capture, and this is where its elongated snout becomes more than just a strange feature, because embedded within that structure are dense arrays of electroreceptors known as the ampullae of Lorenzini, capable of detecting the faint electrical fields generated by the muscle contractions of other organisms, allowing the goblin shark to sense prey hidden beneath sediment or drifting invisibly in darkness, effectively giving it a sixth sense that compensates for the near-total absence of light, and when combined with its protrusible jaws, this creates a hunting system that is both passive and devastatingly precise, a predator that doesn't need to see its target, doesn't need to chase it, and doesn't even need to get particularly close before initiating a strike that almost always succeeds. But the mechanics go deeper still, because unlike most sharks whose jaws are tightly integrated into the skull, the goblin shark's jaw structure is unusually loose and highly flexible, connected by elongated ligaments that allow for extreme forward projection, and this flexibility is supported by a reduced calcification of its skeleton, meaning its cartilage remains softer and more pliable than that of faster, more aggressive sharks, which might seem like a disadvantage in terms of strength, but in reality, it reduces energy expenditure and allows for greater mechanical range during feeding, essentially trading durability for efficiency in a world where conserving energy is more important than overpowering prey, and this trade-off is reflected throughout its entire physiology, from its relatively weak musculature to its low-density body, which allows it to hover almost effortlessly in the water column, minimizing the need for constant swimming. And even its liver plays a role here, being rich in lipids that provide buoyancy, reducing the energy cost of staying suspended in the deep ocean's mid-water zones, where it often resides between 200 and 1,000 meters below the surface, drifting through a realm scientists call the mesopelagic and bathopelagic zones, where pressure increases dramatically and temperatures drop to near freezing, conditions that would be lethal to most surface-dwelling organisms but are perfectly normal for creatures like the goblin shark, which has evolved enzymes and cellular processes that function efficiently under these extremes. And yet, despite all of these adaptations, the goblin shark is not a dominant predator in the way we might imagine. It doesn't dominate through speed or aggression, but through specialization, occupying a niche so specific that few other species compete directly with it, feeding primarily on deep-sea fish, cephalopods like squid, and crustaceans, often targeting organisms that themselves rely on stealth and camouflage, creating a layered ecosystem where detection and deception are constantly in balance, and in this environment, the goblin shark's ability to sense electrical signals gives it an advantage that bypasses visual concealment entirely, making it particularly effective against prey that would otherwise be nearly impossible to locate. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of its feeding behavior is not just the speed or the mechanics, but the sheer alien quality of the motion itself, because when its jaws extend, the shark's entire face seems to transform, the snout remaining rigid while the mouth suddenly bursts forward, exposing rows of long, needle-like teeth that are perfectly designed for grasping rather than cutting, teeth that curve inward to prevent escape once prey is captured, and the effect is so abrupt, so visually jarring, that it has been compared to scenes from science fiction horror, despite being entirely real, entirely natural. A reminder that evolution can produce outcomes that feel unnatural simply because they operate outside our expectations, and this raises an important question that scientists continue to explore. Why did the goblin shark evolve this particular strategy, when so many other deep-sea predators rely on different methods, such as bioluminescence to lure prey or enlarged mouths to engulf it? and the answer likely lies in a combination of historical lineage and environmental pressure. Because the goblin shark belongs to an ancient family, Mitsucarinidae, which diverged from other shark lineages millions of years ago, meaning its evolutionary path was shaped by conditions that no longer exist in the same form today, preserving traits that may have once been more common but are now rare or unique, effectively making the goblin shark a window into an earlier stage of shark evolution, where experimentation with feeding mechanisms produced a variety of forms, most of which eventually disappeared, leaving behind only a few survivors like this one, carrying forward designs that seem strange not because they are flawed, but because they are remnants of a different evolutionary landscape. And even now, much about the goblin shark remains unknown, because studying it in its natural habitat is extraordinarily difficult, requiring deep-sea submersibles and rare encounters that provide only brief glimpses into its behavior, meaning that every piece of footage, every specimen collected, adds to a slowly growing understanding of a creature that has spent most of its existence beyond human observation, hidden in depths that remain among the least explored regions of our planet, and this lack of knowledge only adds to its mystique. Because the more we learn about the goblin shark, the more it challenges our assumptions about how life adapts, survives, and evolves under extreme conditions, revealing that the boundaries of biological possibility are far broader than we once believed, and that in the silent, crushing darkness of the deep ocean, evolution doesn't just create life. It creates forms that feel almost impossible, mechanisms that seem engineered rather than grown, and predators that don't just hunt, but deploy themselves with a precision and strangeness that continues to unsettle even those who study them most closely. And yet, despite everything we've uncovered about the goblin shark, its impossible anatomy, its spring-loaded jaws, its ghost-like existence drifting through the deepest layers of the ocean, there is a final, unsettling truth that lingers beneath all of it, something far more profound than biology alone, because the goblin shark is not just a creature that survived, it is a creature that refused to change. A lineage that has endured for over 100 million years with only minimal evolutionary alteration, quietly bypassing the pressures that forced countless other species to adapt or disappear, and in doing so, it challenges one of our most fundamental assumptions about evolution itself, the idea that progress always means becoming more advanced, more refined, more efficient, when in reality, the goblin shark suggests something very different, that sometimes survival has nothing to do with improvement at all, but with finding a form that works just well enough in a specific environment and then simply staying there, unchanged, untouched, almost invisible to the passage of time. But this kind of stability comes at a cost, because being so specialized, so perfectly tuned to the deep-sea environment, also makes the goblin shark incredibly vulnerable to any disturbance within that narrow ecological niche, and while it has survived natural shifts in ocean chemistry, climate cycles, and mass extinctions that wiped out entire branches of life, it now exists in a world where the greatest threat is not geological or cosmic, but human, because the deep ocean, once considered unreachable, untouchable, is no longer beyond our influence, as advances in deep-sea fishing, mining, and exploration begin to penetrate the very habitats that have sheltered creatures like the goblin shark for millions of years, and although encounters remain rare, there have been increasing reports of goblin sharks caught as bycatch in deep-water fisheries, hauled to the surface where their bodies, adapted to immense pressure, cannot survive, turning a species that once existed almost entirely outside human awareness into one that is now, slowly, being drawn into our sphere of impact. And yet, unlike more charismatic animals whose declines are immediately noticed and widely mourned, the goblin shark exists in obscurity, its population size largely unknown, its behavior still poorly understood, making it difficult to even assess the true scale of the threat it faces. Because how do you measure the decline of something you barely observe, something that spends its entire life in a realm we have only just begun to explore? And this uncertainty creates a paradox where a species can be at risk without ever being recognized as endangered, slipping toward potential decline without triggering the alarms that protect more visible forms of life. But beyond conservation, beyond the question of whether the goblin shark will continue to exist, there is a deeper significance to its story, because it represents a kind of evolutionary memory, a living archive of biological design that predates modern ecosystems, offering scientists a rare opportunity to study traits and mechanisms that have persisted across vast stretches of time, providing insights into how life adapts not just to survive, but to endure, to remain stable in environments that themselves remain relatively unchanged. And in this sense, the goblin shark is not just a relic, but a reference point, a baseline, against which we can measure the pace and direction of evolutionary change, reminding us that the diversity of life is not a linear progression, but a branching, chaotic process where some paths lead to complexity and others to strange forms of equilibrium. And perhaps this is why the goblin shark feels so unsettling to us, because it disrupts our expectations. It exists outside the narrative we've constructed about nature, where predators are sleek and powerful, where evolution trends toward optimization and elegance, because instead, it shows us something raw and unresolved, a design that works not because it is perfect, but because it is sufficient, a creature that doesn't need to impress, doesn't need to dominate, only needs to persist in the quiet darkness where competition is limited and survival is measured not in speed or strength, but in patience and precision. And when we look at the goblin shark through this lens, it stops being a monster of the deep, stops being an anomaly to be feared or ridiculed, and instead becomes something far more intriguing, a testament to the unpredictability of life, to the idea that evolution is not guided by aesthetics or human perception, but by the simple, relentless logic of survival, where even the most bizarre forms can find their place and endure for millions of years without ever needing to conform to what we consider normal. And so the question is no longer why the goblin shark is so strange, but why we expect it not to be, because in the vast, largely unexplored depths of our own planet, where pressure crushes, light vanishes, and time seems to move differently, perhaps the real mystery is not that such creatures exist, but that we are only now beginning to notice them, only now realizing that beneath the surface of familiar oceans lies an entirely different world, one that has been evolving in parallel with our own, hidden from view, shaping forms that challenge our understanding of biology, of adaptation, of life itself, and in that darkness, the goblin shark continues to drift, unchanged, unseen, a silent reminder that evolution does not owe us comfort or familiarity, that it can produce creatures that feel alien not because they come from another world, but because they reveal just how little we truly understand about this one, and as long as those depths remain unexplored, there will always be forms of life that defy explanation, that linger at the edges of our knowledge, waiting not to be discovered, but simply to continue existing as they always have, quietly, efficiently, and completely indifferent to whether or not we ever understand them.